Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Jason of Pro Se. Did you know? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here with our recording. This is a pre recorded show, and I'm going to go ahead and start with a disclaimer which says that this is not intended to be legal advice. In the event that you need legal advice, you should seek out an attorney. This is for educational and entertainment purposes only. And this is here as a bastion of knowledge for you to pull from. However, it is recommended that you research these subjects fully so that you may be able to fully understand the actions in which you are about to impose upon. With that being said, you've probably noticed that we have been adding and deleting episodes. There is a little bit of a transition about bringing you a professional product. Let's go ahead and start with some basic history. We need to know what money is so that we know how to be able to operate. Because in order for us to conduct commerce, to either keep ourselves in debt, out of debt, or whatever it may be, we must understand the very tool that we have. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some American history. However, before I go into American history, I want to go into some older history. Money has been around for ages. It was the next step after barter. With barter, you were limited on the amount of time and effort and energy you could spend being able to go out there and trade to be able to make yourself a mill. You weren't able to be very productive. With the introduction of money, it first started, one of the first recordings of it after the fall of Rome would be China. And China started with seashells. And those seashells they allowed to act as currency to be able to trade amongst each other. However, what ended up happening is that more and more people started going to the beach and grabbing seashells, which caused an inflation of the market and caused an economic collapse. The main thing that we want to take from this story is that anything can be money, whether it's paper, gold, silver, your body, your labor, your equity, your property. It doesn't matter. Anything can be money as long as there's a mutually agreed upon exchange. Another example would be the tally stick system. It's part of what started our modern banking system that we know today. The king, in order to get out from under the bankers, decided to quit using gold and silver and go to a tally stick system. This tally stick system was very simple. You took a stick, a branch, and you cut specific notches in it to represent monetary value. You cut the stick in half, let the treasury keep half as record, and the other half goes to the individual. The king therefore required that all money or all taxes be paid in tally sticks. That actually led to a huge boom, and what it would end up later allowing Britain to become the power that it ended up becoming was because of the tally stick system. When people have freedom of currency, they have prosperity because they understand that currency is nothing more than a tool. It is when they start to covet that is when they start having issues. So let's go ahead and jump into American history and see the history of the money here in America. One of the distinguishing things about our currency, unlike everybody else's currency, is that our currency doesn't change with the change of power. For example, you go over to Egypt. Whenever the president of Egypt goes out of power and there's a new president that comes into power, the old president's money is therefore discarded and the new president's money is issued. Everybody's given 72 hours to be able to exchange their currency for the new currency, otherwise they completely lose their value. Our currency is the most stable currency in the world. However, please don't come under the mistake that this is actually our currency. It's not. The Federal Reserve is considered a bank that the United States contracts with for its currency, However, it's the US dollar that is considered international currency. It's a reserve currency. Everybody uses it. All currencies are pegged to the dollar. So one of the greatest misconceptions is that the dollar is an American dollar, and it's actually not. It's a world dollar. It's a world currency. So after the Revolutionary War, there was a war debt that was supposed to be paid. We were originally under what is called the Articles of Confederation. We're still partially under the Articles of Confederation. However, the Constitution was an add-on to it to further give the Articles of Confederation more teeth, essentially. So going through the American Revolution, we were able to essentially in 1783 get the Treaty of Paris signed. However, after the war was over, there was a debt that was owed. That debt was owed to the King of England, which was the Crown Bank of England, and it was also owed to the French bank as well, because it was the French and the English that had ended up financing the war. The reason why most banks can finance both sides of the war is that there is an agreement amongst nations that the victor takes on the loser's debt. So when we went in and we took over, let's say, Iraq, we now assumed all the debt that Iraq had accumulated in fighting us so that the bankers could ensure that they gained maximum profit. So we ended up owing somewhere around 14 million gold, $14 million in gold. And back then that was a lot of money, unlike today. So the states, because of the Articles of Confederation, they were unable to collect taxes. Because they couldn't collect taxes, they started printing their own currency, bringing about fiat currency, and the creditors caught wind of this, realized that there was no value in the paper that they were receiving, and therefore demanded their payment. What ended up happening is that's what brings about the Constitution. A constitutor is someone who takes the debt of one and passes it on to another. The states were the ones that fought the Revolutionary War, the original 13 colonies. And those colonies had to pay for that. However, they didn't have the money. So what they decided was to create a separate entity so that they could pass their debt onto another entity and create an association through the Constitution for the United States of America. Now, once this happened, what we ended up having to do is to create a system under the Constitution that allowed the creditors to be able to gain their funds without arresting the land, which was what the collateral was. We had to have some form of collateral, and it was the land. It was the property of the states that they pledged. If you look in the Declaration of Independence, they were able to pledge their life, their posterity and their wealth, for the cause in which they believed in. Those guys staked everything. They were the only ones that truly had anything to gain or lose from this, and that is the reason why we ended up entering into this agreement in the first place. So now we have the Constitution. Here's the thing, though. When you're dealing in international law and you're dealing in international finance, contracts are a little bit different. Contracts last for a total of 70 years. The Constitution, which was the renegotiation of the bankruptcy, was started in 1789. 70 years later, that would be 1859. Now, around 1859, the debt became due, and President Lincoln had to figure out a way to be able to resolve that matter. And so we went to the creditors and he said, hey, look, we owe you this money. We know we owe you this money. However, we don't have it all right now. Is there a way we can renegotiate it? And the creditors said, yeah, sure. What we will do is we will go ahead and push it back another 70 years. We want a little bit of money up front. And all these new states that you have since the inception of the original Constitution, we want them to pledge their land as well for the renegotiation of this debt. And so Lincoln ends up taking it to the states, and the states decide, the new states that had come in after the signing of the original Constitution, after the original 13 colonies. Okay, the original 13 colonies were the only ones that were on the line as far as owing the debt. Once the new states had come in, they weren't a party to that bankruptcy negotiation with the Crown Bank of England and the Bank of France. So therefore, they looked at it as, why do we want to owe for a debt that we didn't even create? We came in after all of this was done. And this is where the secession of the states came from. There was some about slavery, but slavery was already on its way out. Slavery had pretty much been outlawed everywhere but the United States, and it was already in the process of being outlawed anyways. There is also the matter that the son of Napoleon Bonaparte had borrowed some money to be able to put some troops on the northern border of Mexico, to be able to put pressure on some of the southern states, as well as the economic war that was going on between the South and the North, because the South was on free trade. They didn't have any tariffs, whereas the North, they had tariffs. So the North wasn't able to, was using what's called protectionist policies. And when they used these protectionist policies, that kind of started a trade war between the North and the South. So there was already some tension. Those were contributing factors. However, the number one reason, the only reason, the main reason why the Civil War started in 1861 was because the additional states that had come on after the signing of the Constitution were refusing to add themselves as sureties to the debts for the original 13 colonies. The creditors, once they found out that the South was seceding, the creditors came out and said, well, you've got two choices. Either you've got to pay the debt and we're going to take your land from you, or you've got to go force these guys to go ahead and pay. Your second option is, get these guys to pay. That's your only two options. So once he gave them the ultimatum, that's kind of where the Civil War begins. After the Civil War is over, hold on, let's back up for a second. There was an important piece of legislation that was passed. It was, I believe it was Executive Order 1 by Abraham Lincoln, and that was the suspension of habeas corpus, and I believe posse comitatus was also suspended. And what posse comitatus is that prevents the military from operating within the boundaries of the United States. Some of that was restored after the Civil War. However, Congress, since they declared war, they also declared us under martial rule. Not martial law, martial rule. There's a big difference. I'm going to tell you to go out and research it yourself. After martial rule, with martial rule in place, this allowed the North to be able to do what they did as far as declaring war against the South. Once the war was over, Congress never, under any circumstance, declared peace. In all technicality, we're still at war with the South and have been since 1861. Congress never declared peace. There are some specific reasons why they didn't declare peace. Looking at this from a contractual or a trust point of view, either way works, because everything is either a contract or a trust or both. Looking at this from a contract, or excuse me, from a trust standpoint. The trust was set up that the states became the grantors and allowed the United States to become the trustee for the benefit of the international bankers. Once that contract was up, once the note became payable, the note became due, and the southern states refused to become the sureties, the debt became due, the contract became void. The United States, the original Constitution, ceased to exist as of, 1859. Let's just even give it a little bit more credence because they took some time to try and renegotiate it. Let's say 1861. So that means Oregon and a few other states are one of the last states to enter into the United States under the de jure, the correct government. Because after that, after the declaration of the Civil War, the original contract, the Constitution for the United States, was changed to the Constitution of the United States. And this was done through the Reorganization Act of 1871. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. There were some important pieces of legislation that were passed after the Civil War. The first one was the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment says, "There shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude to exist within the United States." It says involuntary servitude. That means that you can voluntarily contract yourself into slavery. Let me repeat that again. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States. That means you can contract your rights away. What is so significant about that? The reason why that's significant is because the very next amendment that they passed was the 14th Amendment. This amendment is depends upon who you ask. They'll call it the 14th Amendment citizen, they'll call it the U.S. citizen, they'll call it the federal citizen, they'll call it the straw man, they'll call it the de facto person. Depends upon who you talk to. All right, and de facto means wrong, incorrect. Okay, it means that they don't exist. It's a fraud. All right, so essentially, if you were to go back under the original Constitution and to look at it from that point of view, you would see the current government as a de facto government and the previous government, the republic, as the de jure government. All right, and these are some terms that you can look up yourself and you can kind of figure out how to wrap your head around this. What I'm doing is I'm covering some basics so that you have a basic understanding of how we got to the current money situation. Now, with the 14th Amendment citizen, or what I'm going to hereinafter call the federal citizen, because that's exactly what it is, and that's what the Supreme Court even calls it. They don't call it the 14th Amendment citizen, they call it the federal citizen. And the federal citizen were the freed black slaves. Now, the reason why they even had to create it, or at least the original intent, or what they told us was the original intent, was that the southern states weren't allowing freed black slaves to gain citizenship, because citizenship was always done by the states. Each state is its own sovereign country under an association called the United States for the common welfare and defense of the several states. Those states, some states, were refusing to allow free black slaves to be able to gain citizenship. And a lot of our founders said that no man shall ever be stateless. No man shall remain stateless. Which means that you need to be able to have a place or a country or an association or a society to call your own. And that is where the federal citizen or the U.S. citizen was created. Now, let's go ahead and fast forward. We already talked about the Reorganization Act of 1871. And the Reorganization Act of 1871, the most important thing out of it is that we moved from what is called a republic to a quasi-democracy. It essentially incorporated or made the United States, USA Inc., a corporation. If you actually go read the act, the Reorganization Act of 1871 or the Reorganization Act of the District of Columbia, you can find it under both of those names. It will essentially explain that the United States is a corporation. It is now in charge of servicing the debt because they wanted to keep their pipe dream going. They wanted to keep, well, it's not even a pipe dream, it's a great dream. The original dream is that man can govern himself. We don't need somebody else to tell us what to do. So these guys were trying to carry that on in the best way possible because the southern states and the new states were being unruly, and they really weren't taking an appropriate approach to it, which is to at least be responsible and figure out a new way to service the debt instead of throwing a temper tantrum and going, no, I ain't paying, and you can't make me. All right? So let's fast forward another 70 years. All right? The debt becomes due again. 70 years from 1859 is 1929. Most of us know what happened around 1929. It's called the Great Depression, the Hoover Depression. It created what we call the greatest generation ever to have lived. Because we went through World War II in a Great Depression and came out an economic powerhouse. Some important things to know about the Great Depression. What it really was. It wasn't a depression, I would say. I mean, it could be technically called a depression, but what happened is because the debt became due, the Federal Reserve, which was part of the connection to the international bankers, it was their way of ensuring that they were able to get their money. They started calling in all their loans, they started raising the reserve rates, and started setting everything back so that the debt could be paid off. However, once they did that, we went from the circulation of like $1,600 in circulation per person down to like $16.50. It wasn't that there wasn't enough work, it's just that there wasn't enough money to be able to facilitate commerce. So when FDR came in, he invoked the Constitution. What he said is essentially, all right, states, I'm here to service the debt because that is what the original intent of the Constitution was. I need you to turn over all assets. Well, the states really didn't have very many assets to begin with, but the people did. So what they tried to do, and through the offering of benefits and privileges such as Social Security, unemployment, welfare, food stamps, health care, all these different things, they got you to essentially sign your estate, your property, everything you own over to the United States so that they could essentially acquire all of your assets to service this astronomical debt that has gotten so big over time that it really is, there's no way anybody could ever pay back the debt. Because if you borrow money into circulation and then you add an interest rate on top of it, you have to create more money just to be able to pay the interest rate, and there's no way logically to be able to pay off a debt. And that is the reason why we keep getting in these situations. There are many countries, some of them have gotten out of it and some of them have never recovered. And hopefully, we being the powerhouse that we are, we will recover, but we will not be in the same shape. And hopefully we will come out a lot smarter. There was some, once FDR went ahead and took the money and the property away from the states and started offering benefits and privileges to the citizens of the states in exchange for them turning over their property and becoming federal citizens, they passed a law. It's called House Joint Resolution 192, Public Law 73-10. This law essentially shows you what the big change was, what the New Deal was that Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave us. Under the Just Compensation Clause in the Constitution, it says that you must give something of equal or greater value in the event that you take something away from someone. They took our most valuable resource away, our currency, our ability to have an economy. They took away our gold, the only currency that we had that was lawful under the Constitution. They had to give us something of equal or greater value. What did they give us? They gave us promissory notes. They gave us unconditional promises to pay, also known as legal tender for all debts, public and private. Federal Reserve notes, promissory notes, checks, drafts, money orders. These are all negotiable instruments. All right? Because you pledge yourself, your estate, your property, and everything that you own as a surety to the United States, they gave you something of equal or greater value, which is all debts of the United States shall be paid by the Treasury dollar for dollar. Well, if you have become a United States citizen, you are an obligation of the United States, which means, essentially, everything that you buy, every debt that you rack up, is a debt obligation of the United States. Let me repeat that. Whatever debt you rack up, whatever contracts you sign, whatever you do that requires money, upon presentment to the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. Treasury will pay that debt dollar for dollar. If it is an obligation of the United States, i.e. it is the obligation of either the United States or a U.S. citizen. Now, you gave up your whole estate to become a U.S. citizen, didn't you? And in exchange, they agreed to pay all your bills for you. And this is what the biggest change was in our currency system. We had to know why they were taking away the money so that we can understand why they gave us something new. We have contracted our way into slavery in a sense. However, we've also gotten some great benefits and privileges from it as well. And you have to decide what capacity you want to act in. See, what they don't tell you is that you have the capacity to act as a natural man, as a mom, as a dad, as a U.S. citizen, as a citizen of the soil, as a citizen of the globe, as a citizen of the earth. You have all these different capacities. You have the capacity to be a membership at a gym. These are capacities. These are contracts. And under those contracts, you have certain duties and obligations that allow you to act in a specific capacity. The same thing with your U.S. citizen, the same thing with everything. This is essentially what you guys are being allowed. This is the change that was given to you as grantors in this great experiment called the United States for the benefit of your trustee or of your beneficiary, which is your United States citizen. You are one of the beneficiaries. You are one of the trustees. You are the only grantor. Doesn't that mean that since you're the one that's on the hook for the debt, and it's your body that's being sold into slavery, in the event that you need to create money, since you are the surety for it anyways, tell me where you are denied this duty and this obligation, this right and this responsibility to be able to handle all of your matters. You can either go through the public where they want to be your nanny, or you can go through the private and be your own nanny and act like a grown-up and be responsible and take some time and learn. That is the moral behind all of this. We wouldn't have had half the problems that we had if our leaders and if our people had been educated, informed, and had been responsible with their actions. If they had stood up instead of fighting a civil war to work out an agreement that benefits everybody, we wouldn't have had the loss of life, we wouldn't have the loss of liberty. But when you're irresponsible, this is what happens. Mommy puts you in timeout. We've been put in timeout. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something. Have a great day.